What's up, guys? I'm Leland with Bottom Table Tyrants, and we are here with some more questions for your GMs. Let's jump right into them.
Problems staying with the current campaign. So there's the fallback, which is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which is a great system. It is arguably the best system that exists for most campaigns that you want to run, most groups that you want to run. It is super easy on the math. The fact that they've gotten everything down to roll a dice, add a number to the result, compare it to the target. That's the only math you need to do in Dungeons & Dragons.
No, I don't. I don't like switching campaigns.
You mean like every 3 or 4 sessions, you don't like to just switch to a totally another system? Maybe a totally another like web online system too?
Well,
Fantasy
I wouldn't.
Grounds,
I wouldn't
Roll20.
mind. I don't mind, as a player, switching games, but as a GM, I am content with one Pathfinder 2nd edition right now. Not saying I wouldn't later on, but I am totally content on playing a campaign out for a while and watching it grow, because I've never gotten a max character. So I would love to see the reward of what happens 5 years later or whatever, where you actually get a level 20 character. I'm like, hey, I would like to feel that reward. So that's one reason why as a GM, I'm fine with one campaign.
I think every GM has that problem, and I don't think there's any GM anywhere that can honestly say that every campaign that they've ever wanted to do or started has went to, the fruition, has finished the race, so to speak. I think that's why it's such a... I think that's one of the reasons I got on, social media sites and started, because I discovered, oh, hey, I'm not the only one that's had an idea or wanted to do something. It just, didn't happen.
Horror is usually easier because you should really run 1-shot, 2-shot, maybe 3-shot horror games and cut it off there.
I would love to have the time and the brain space to jump around and try different games.
I ran a game of Cyberpunk Red, which is the newest edition, and I wanted it to be this really cool, like, Blade Runner-esque. There's a murder and there's corporate espionage going on, and they need to figure this stuff out, but players also wanted to have combat. And in Cyberpunk, combat is roll these dice, add this modifier, see if it beats the 2-hit. If it does beat the hit, roll the damage, see if it beats the armor. If it does beat the armor, then it does that much overage damage to the character, and the armor's value reduces because it's been pierced, and now your calculations for future hits are all different. And it's just like, I guess it's okay on the player end of things. As a GM, I got tired of doing that math every round of combat, and it wasn't working. It wasn't fitting. And so we ended up saying, hey, are you guys having fun with this? No, not really. I'm not really having fun with this. We enjoy the story that I'm trying to get through, but no one's having fun in the system, and it doesn't feel good. So remember, we're playing a game together. We're hanging out together. Let's scrap this.
If I had to lean one way with magic items, it would be I overdo it. I mean, in Wrath of the Righteous, I remember they were on level 4. There's a magic carpet the sorcerer had. They had the tree to bring limbs back. Just because I want to throw items in there and see what they do. Out of sheer curiosity of what these 5, at that time, single guys, had time to every other Friday to come to my house and play Pathfinder. Like, what would they do with this? So I probably overdo it.
I overdid it. My first probably my only real big campaign. I gave everybody these really cool relic things that didn't take up a magic slot. Like, they didn't even count for a magic item, and it made them ridiculously overpowered, in my opinion.
Okay.
It definitely made me change the power level to the entire situation. And anymore, I figured out magic items are great, but sparingly is usually best.
I would say most likely I underdo it with magic items. I don't really give my players a whole lot of stuff. A lot of times I'll give them something at the end of a mini campaign, and I'll say, cool, you have this magic item. Whoever GM's next, if you play this character, they can figure out what that magic item does.
I wish I would do more with my magic items frequency or special items. It's like a lot of things where you sort of take it too seriously as a dungeon master GM. Like, oh, I have to have the special thing, and then after a while, you kind of realize it doesn't matter. And the thing is if you give them special items and more powerful things, all you need to do is have more powerful enemies, or more. The consequences are steeper. I mean, you can always balance it out with whatever you're giving your players.
I don't find that magic items, especially combat magic items, are all that interesting for a lot of players. I have stolen a lot of non-combat items from lists and things like that, especially podcasts. Shout out to the Adventure Zone, the Nitpicker, which is the little gnome that you can set it in front of a lock and it will pick the lock, and the entire time that it's picking the lock, it will nitpick every decision the players have made all campaign. Oh my god, that's so much fun as a GM, because now I get to vent all my frustrations to their face and they can't do anything about it. I find out of combat magic items are the way to go.
I actually tend to like caster classes, because I've noticed they tend to get, at least as from a GM perspective. From a GM perspective, I tend to like caster classes a little bit more, whether it be bard or sorcerer, whatever, because they'll tend to be a little more creative with their usage of the abilities. I mean, being able to swing a sword twice doesn't give you a whole lot of opportunity for roleplay. So there's definitely something to be said for somebody that can actually make that really work for them and really get some extra, chutzpah or extra storytelling vibes, put in there for that. But, I had a player, he put a solid 5-foot cube in the middle of a rainstorm. Bad guy failed his perception check. Bonk, just knocked himself out. I was brilliant. It was such a small thing, but it was very creative.
My favorite class, and this is something I decided to do as a player for the most part, was I'd randomize everything. So gender, race, class, background, and sort of let the dice formulate a character, and then figure out how I was going to play that character.
My favorite character class in 5th edition, probably biased, is Druid, because I made a Druid and I played 2 sessions with her, and one of my friends got hit by an ogre, so I ran over to cure wounds on that player to bring them back to life. And then the ogre hit my character and immediately did twice her HP and damage. And cool, character's dead. Sorry, you don't get to play her anymore. But we didn't deal with it that way. Instead, I rolled up a new character for 1 or 2 sessions just to tide over. And then that GM passed off GMing to me, and I ran those players through a campaign of bringing that druid back to life. And then that druid I got to play in a different campaign where she was unfortunately an undead druid, and all of her druid powers were super dark and thorny and death-oriented instead of nature and life-oriented.
The funnest class was the librarian, because they're, again, Fantasy Flight overcomplicated it, but when the psychic powers went too far, the tables and the consequences were absolutely hilarious, to the point where the guy would try and do it on purpose just to see what would happen.
My favorite would be the bard, and only because one, it's the music, and then 2, it's the it can be pretty sneaky and charismatic.
My favorite 5th edition race would probably be, just statistically, based on the characters that I make, it would be human. For some reason, I'm that person who likes to make humans. I don't care about elves and dwarves and things like that. Most of my characters end up being human, because most everyone else's characters end up being not human, and I like being that balance to the group.
Favorite 40k race would be, I'm a chaos guy. It's first army, word bearers forever. I've been painting that same army for 16 years. They're garbage. I'll continue to play them. I love the demons, I love the lore. It goes back to lore, character, and then the aesthetic. And that's just a beautiful combination for that. And I know they're genetically engineered super soldiers, but they're possessed. And the demon summoning and the fervor of it is just, I don't know, very appealing to me. As far as the D&D race goes, we're the bird people.
Oh, there's like the
Kukri?
Kenku.
Kenku, yeah. That would, if I'm gonna, my next D&D thing would probably be a Kenku.
Probably the goblin at this point, considering your character you made with Flecky. Probably a goblin. But I don't know how a goblin bard would do it. I never thought of that together.
Some sort of small bagpipe, I would think. So.
Yeah, maybe.
What I've discovered since I started running the bad guy campaign is let your players choose what they want and then just make them use the standard array. It is so much more fun because I've gotten stuff from, giant monsters that people haven't even figured out what they are, all the way to just a normal run-of-the-mill warlock that people are having way more fun with because they're getting more autonomy and more agency. So I would say the more invested, I would say it doesn't really, the race doesn't matter as long as the player's invested in the character.
Just because I play Magic the Gathering, Loxodon, to play an elephant person, giant elephant person, is so cool. I don't know what it is about elephants. I've loved them ever since I was a little kid and I had highlights magazines, but elephants, Loxodon, that's where it's at.
I like it. I don't like it when it's used to game the system.
Multi-classing is hitting close to home because I'm running this all bard group, but I didn't want just a group of bards because then they're all going to feel the same. Even though there's enough colleges now that they can all be different colleges, I wanted them to feel a little bit different. So the first level of each of these characters had to be a non-bard level.
It always seems like if you're going to multi-class, you're basically doing it to cheese out your character, which is never my goal. Because it goes back to supposed to be fun. And so I will purposely make characters that suck badly at certain things just to keep it interesting. Because then those stats and those traits and those skills really filter into the personality. And if you're just trying to multi-class, I guess the thing too is as long as there's a very good reason and a very good explanation of why they want to multi-class, that's fine. But because I want to do the most damage or because I want to be the most powerful, that's not a good answer.
I feel like multi-classing in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is as well designed as it can be. Spellcasting gets a little bit complicated until you take 10 to 15 minutes to really study it. It's a little upsetting that you can't get to your 20th level pinnacle class stat, but hopefully you make up for that with all of the other things that you learn from the 2 classes that you do get, or more than 2 classes that you do get. And I don't think I've ever had a campaign where my characters reached 20th level anyway, so...
This goes back to the planning thing of if your session depends on splitting the party, you almost need 4 or 5 different opportunities or ways that's going to happen. So where the party split's going to happen, but you have to find the most organic way for it. And it depends on the players as well, where sometimes they do something like this, and you get kidnapped, it could add some mystery to it. It's always the challenge of mystery versus frustration, where they're interested or like, wow, that was dumb kind of thing. That engagement challenge. So I try to keep my players together for the most part, just because I don't want to deal with taking 1 session and then trying to manage 2 sessions at the same time.
Only if it's what they did, their decision. They decided to walk through a cavern that a cave that was crumbling, and they had all these signs that it's going to possibly collapse, and it does, and it splits the party. Like, hey, that's what happens. So let's play this out. So
I think the most important thing when it comes to separating PCs or doing anything that takes one of the players out of the game for a little bit is you can only do it if it's that player's choice, and not necessarily their choice out of game. That'll happen sometimes, right? I gotta go on vacation. Can you have my character get captured? Not that, but give them the opportunity to make mistakes in game, and then have the repercussions of those mistakes or the repercussions of those actions lead to a separation.
I like to have. I actually had a situation that was pretty close to that, where a guy tried to come in and to the rescue and ended up getting kidnapped, and it worked out really well. But it thematically made sense. So I think that's the main thing. Is once again it goes back to just that if it makes sense in the story, and especially if the players get behind it, that's your biggest thing. That's what at least that's what I'm trying to do this whole time, is whether I'm telling the story or they're telling the story or we're telling the story together at that moment, as long as everybody's on the same page and they're like, oh crap, he's about to get kidnapped, then there's my cue of, oh yeah, that guy's totally getting kidnapped now, because they said it and it's a good idea.
It feels like taking agency away from the player if you have it written in your notes before you sit down for the session that you're going to capture one of the players. You can't take away their opportunity to make decisions and make mistakes.
I don't think the effects in D&D are used nearly enough, even to the point of getting knocked down, getting paralyzed, the sleep condition. Any of those things are all way underutilized, in my opinion. Or maybe they're just underutilized in my games. Very good possibility. Because I've recently started discovering, you made me this nice set of cards, and it's kind of nice to go, okay, you have to draw from this deck, and after this tremor happened or earthquake or whatever, this is what's happened to you. Somebody get bonked on the head, sometimes maybe a rock flew out of nowhere, who knows. Anyway, I think those are great. Those are great because it makes other players either work to protect you or figure out the situation or something to that nature. As long as you're not just going, okay, now hand me your character sheet after the earthquake, then yeah, I think that's okay. As long as it's not designed to kill a player.
yeah, fuck 'em. You should have been more prepared for the fight then. No, but if they're playing it, if there's a point in time where okay, you got to do something about it, but totally fine if it happens, and they just got to be more prepared next time.
But I think the other part of that question is, which you kind of hinted at, which is what happens when a player has, I call it a zero-sum turn. And I hate those. They bother me as both a player and a GM. All right, I'm going to attack this guy. And you attack him and you whiff. You don't whiff hard enough to really make it interesting, but you whiff just enough that nothing happens. And you can't do anything and you're stuck there. And 5e is super guilty of that. Because if you try to get away, unless you're a rogue, you're just stuck.
I like to, so one of the things I did when I was making the Death Finder, is what I called it, where I bought a bunch of tokens, and if someone's going to get knocked out or skit, it's going to be for a good reason. I mean, if you get thrown across the hall, or vacuum of space, or the vortex grenade, like any number of things that can happen. And it goes back to if the pace of things is fast enough. That's my whole bit. Just make a choice, roll damage. Here's your wounds, here's whatever. Next person, trying to keep it all literally under 15-20 seconds a player, where it won't matter if they're out of it for 1 or 2 rounds.
5e is really based off action economy. So when you lose a turn in that combat, that's a big deal. And usually those kind of effects, they only really happen in combat. Occasionally they'll happen in other times, but nobody really cares, because if it's out of combat, they're not scared of dying unless, that's a story element or something like that. And once again, that goes back to, you shouldn't just be scooping up somebody's paper and ripping it in half or killing their character for no reason. That's not fun. That's not a game. That's a power trip.
And that feels a lot like this question of if you're taking a turn away from a player. I think, again, it goes back to what is the effect that you're trying to have on that player? How do you want them to feel in that moment? And I think it can be incredibly powerful if the group feels like they're winning a fight and then suddenly the monster hits them with an AoE and they all lose a turn at the same time. That can be like an oh shit moment. Sorry, can I curse in this?
Yeah.
That can be like an oh shit moment of we have to figure out how to deal with this. And suddenly the barbarian who can con save out of it on his first turn has to figure out a way to help the cleric who can't con save out of it on their turn and has to like aid and so come up with a solution that way. I think it's important that you don't do it a lot. You don't do it frequently, because then it's going to start to feel like you are abusing the system and taking that agency away from the players. If you use it sparingly, if you use it for a high impact moment, that's when it's going to really feel important and not feel cheap.
But that second part of that can be, and it's really tough, and it's tough to watch for me. But yeah, that's one of my least favorite parts of D&D is there's no way to, if they're out of, you know, if you're out of, you know, inspiration, if you're out of all that stuff, you're just SOL.
All right, guys, that's all the questions for today. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions you want to ask, put them in the comments below and we'll try and ask them in another episode. Thanks, guys. Leland out.